right. Well, today I sit down with Ken Brown, president of Mass Bowhunters Association. Great hunter, great guy, and we talk about just hunting, what it means to us, the tradition of hunting, um, our roles as stewards and representatives of the hunting community when it comes to meeting non-hunters and just having good discourse with non-hunters. And what it means to be mentors for people, the importance of keeping hunting alive. We just touch a lot of great subjects, and we talk about Mass Bowhunters Association, the changes that it's gone through, in the last 5 years, what Mass Bowhunters Association is working on right now, and the NBA Pig Roast at Oxford Rod and Gun Club. You can get your tickets at massbowhunters.com. Go click the shop tab and tickets are right there. A lot of great stuff going on there, but we'll talk about it more in detail in the podcast. The first 10-15 minutes or so is talking about Mass Bowhunters Association, and then we get into just a whole range of topics and what we love about hunting, some hunting stories, and just a great wide-ranging conversation, and I know you guys will enjoy it. So let's get into this podcast now. Here he is, Ken Brown. Okay, welcome to another episode of the Hunt Suburbia podcast, and I'm joined by Ken Brown today. Thanks for coming, Ken.
Hey, Pat. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So Ken and I have gotten to know each other a little bit over the last few years, and Ken is the president of Mass Bowhunters Association. Do you want to talk about a little bit? We'll just start out with Mass Bowhunters Association. What is it that we do, and maybe some of the changes that it's been seen over the last few years in the organization.
Sure.
And then we'll jump into the Pig Roast, which is the major fundraiser, and then we'll get into some deer hunting stories and talk
Awesome.
a lot of hunting.
Awesome. Thanks, Pat. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So for those of you who don't know, Mass Bowhunters has been around for about 50 years, and it was actually founded by Boomer Hayden, and then his son Dennis actually took over after Boomer passed away, and Dennis was the president for close to 20 years. And so my involvement with Mass Bowhunters actually started on the legislative and regulatory front. I got involved about 30 years ago, and I was their representative to the Mass Sportsmen's Council, and then started to focus on getting regulations changed or laws passed that would be beneficial to Mass Bowhunters. I remember when I first started, we had the shortest bow hunting season in the country, and so that was one of our very first initiatives, was to get extended bow hunting opportunities for our hunters in this state.
Which started in the eastern zones, right?
Right. And and then they expanded out, and just this last year will be expanded fully to Western Mass.
And that's also a cause that was largely due to you guys and all the work that you did to get that extended.
Correct.
Yep.
Even the 2 deer limit, I mean, that goes way back, but that's an effort that Mass Bowhunters was heavily involved in. Using mechanical releases. I remember that actually was a legislative initiative, and we had to get legislation changed in order to do it. So it's amazing how fast 30 years goes by, and I don't understand how I'm 39 and I've been doing this for 30 years, but I'll keep lying to myself. But anyway, so Dennis Hayden passed away about 5 years ago, maybe even a little less than that, and so I had been the vice president doing the legislative and regulatory work, and at that time I took over as the president. Now, prior to Dennis passing away, he was sick for a while. And so, we probably backslid a little bit. At one time, we would have an annual banquet with over 350 attendees. We would have events. We would actually lease land on Prudence Island in Rhode Island and have hunts. We would go to Martha's Vineyard and do rabbit hunts. So a lot of those kinds of things, shoots. There was about a 3-year period where we raised in excess of $70,000 in a program called Hunters Taking Aim at Childhood Cancer for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. And we would be on, local media, promoting that and getting recognition for our state's bow hunters. But a lot's changed in the last, I'd say 5 years in particular. And the first was, the passing of Dennis. I think COVID had a profound impact on our organization, like many volunteer organizations, our primary fundraising event was the banquet, as I mentioned. We stopped doing the hunts. I think over time, over the last 10 to 15 years, fewer of us really had the time and the energy and the availability to go do other types of events and look to an organization to drive those things for us. And probably, if you're like me, you want to control your own schedule and do your own events, right? And so we recognized that was probably less of a feature to being a member of the Mass Bowhunters, and really have tried to stay focused on legislation. So even through the last 5 years, we've maintained a pretty high profile with Mass Wildlife, with the Department of Fish and Wildlife. So we've had very strong relationships with the commissioner. Even when Governor Baker was here, his second term, his secretary was a gentleman by the name of Matt Beaton. And Matt and I had worked together very closely on trying to get the crossbow bill passed and Sunday bow hunting passed. And probably the closest we've gotten to getting that done was when Matt was in the legislature and was sponsor of specific legislation in the House that got through the House. And he helped us to do that. And then he became Secretary of Environmental Affairs under the Baker administration and was a great friend to all sportsmen in the state before moving on. So we're up and down in terms of who we've been able to work with, but we've had a very strong presence on a legislative and regulatory basis, even as our organization has gone through some challenges.
What are some of the top initiatives right now that we're working to pass through legislature and get changing in terms of the regulations on the deer seasons and hunting in general?
Yeah, so constantly, I mean, I know everybody's frustrated with it, but Sunday hunting is certainly a priority. And we've gone down the road of just Sunday bow hunting, just Sunday bow hunting on state land, just Sunday bow hunting on private land, anything that we can do to get a foothold on Sunday hunting. And that's a regulatory change. That is not that's a legislative, not a regulatory change. My bad. And so that's going to require both the House and the Senate to vote on it and approve it, and then the governor to approve it. So it's a tough uphill battle, but that's probably one of the ones that we've constantly had on our agenda. Over time, I think some more attainable objectives have been presented for us. The crossbow legislation and allowing crossbow hunting during archery season, or removing the crossbow restriction period, because right now you can't hunt with a crossbow unless you have a special permit. And that special permit basically requires you to be disabled, a doctor's note, indicating you're disabled and unable to pull back a bow. Ironically, roughly 25% of the 30,000 licenses that are now issued in Massachusetts are special permits. Archery license are special permits for crossbow. So that's ridiculous. And that's something that I think needs to change. And we've come close a few times there. And then reducing the setback from 500 feet to 250 feet for archery. If anybody knows anything about archery, your arrow's in the ground, 10 yards past your target if you're on the ground, and even faster if you're shooting from a tree stand. So the 250-yard restriction is ridiculous, and it also seriously curtails the state's ability to use archery as a tool for managing the deer herd in residential or suburban areas.
Yeah, the 500-foot setback down to 250 would be one of, that's one that I'm super in favor for.
Yeah.
Hunting a lot in the suburbs, and when you're hunting in the suburbs, you just drastically decrease the amount of huntable land that way, because there's a lot of houses. Yeah. You have little 40-acre pieces. That 40 acres, when you look at it, you use a tool like OnX and you put that 500-foot radius on all the houses, it shrinks a 40-acre piece into about 8 acres sometimes. Exactly right. of huntable land. Not to mention, I think, at the 500-foot setback, you have to be further away from houses, and that increases the chances that you're going to be shooting back towards the houses, because the deer do like to travel up along the backyard sometimes.
The edges, right?
Or the edges.
Yeah.
So it's, advantageous as a bow hunter to face back towards houses sometimes, which, if people are worried about, which isn't a big issue, as you said, arrows are shooting down into the ground. But if they're worried about deflected arrows and things like that, you're actually at 500 feet, it's more likely that an arrow is going to deflect into somebody's yard or house or whatever it may be. Whereas if it's 250 feet, you're more likely to be facing out into the woods.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
But
So that's a big initiative. I think more recently, when we were at the Springfield Sportsman's Show, and we got a tremendous amount of traffic, and thanks to all those who were able to stop by, one of the things we got a lot of feedback on was bears.
Yep.
And a desire to see extended opportunities to hunt bears and extended opportunities to take an additional bear, right? So we're actually advocating right now for a second bear tag and an extended bear season. And I think those are things that are regulatory, so the Fish and Wildlife Board can actually approve those.
yeah, I did a quabbin hunt last year, and the amount of bears just around the quabbin is absolutely insane.
We
There
can't
is
kill
so
enough
many.
bears.
No.
We really can't kill enough bears, and it's a problem. And the farmers are complaining about, their depredation. So all of those things really align well for, I think, an opportunity to extend the bear season, and we're working with the division right now to try and do that. I think one of the other things I want everybody to be aware of is, so with all the setbacks that we had over the last 5 years as an organization, we've put together a really great core group of people to try and revitalize the Mass Bowhunters Association. So, excited to have you, Pat, and your partner Pat Burns as members of our board of directors. We've had Chris Borgatti from Backcountry Hunters is now a member of our board. Many guys know Chris Reedy from Reedy's Archery, probably one of the premier archery shops in the state, is on our board. And we've got Ernie Foster, who's actually a member of the 7-person Fish and Wildlife Board, who's joined our board as well. So, and that is complementary to a really strong base that we have with myself, with Mark Goodwin as our vice president, and then we've got Lisa and Michael Belil who have worked their heads off tirelessly for the Mass Bowhunters Association through the transition period and the challenging periods we've been through.
Yeah, so we've seen a little drop off in membership over the past few years. Would like to get more members, and what is it for a membership?
Well, we dropped our membership fee significantly, recognizing we weren't holding hunts or so no cost to put on hunts. Again, we stopped the banquet all through COVID, and we're just starting up with events, which we'll talk about in a minute. So we're down to $20 for a membership. It's a case of beer, right?
Yep.
One case of beer a year to support your state bow hunting organization.
Yep. So please get on to massbowhunters.com and get a membership, and you can go on there also to buy tickets to the pig roast, which we'll talk about. The pig roast tickets, if you go to massbowhunters.com and then click the shop tab, there's a place you can buy them right there, or you can call Lisa directly and order tickets that way, and you can call her at 413-315-0248. And just to set the stage for the pig roast, it's on May 5th, but it's going to be the biggest fundraising event for Mass Bowhunters.
Correct.
In the entire year. So it's super important. If you're around that weekend, show up to the pig roast. I've got the details. It's May 5th, and it is at Singletary Rod and Gun Club in Oxford, Massachusetts. It's going to run from 12 to 4 on May 5th. And there will be 3D targets set up in a range if you want to bring your bow and shoot. And we're doing lots of raffle prizes. You can buy raffle tickets for the prizes. There's a couple of bows in there. There's targets. There's knives. There's a whole bunch of great raffle items.
Yeah, the Mass Bowhunters Banquet used to be very well known for having, an awesome array of auction items, silent auction items, raffle items. And I think really Mike and Lisa have done an amazing job of pulling together a great package of items for us to all, have the opportunity to bid on or buy raffle tickets for. And like you said, Pat, it's our primary fundraising event for the year. And almost exclusively our funds are used to support the legislative and regulatory process.
Yep.
We really don't do any other events this for now anyway. Maybe we'll reinstitute our banquet
Yep.
at some point in time here in the near future. But right now, this is our first foray back into a fundraising event.
Yep.
And it should be a fun day. If you haven't been to the Singletary Club, awesome club. Great membership, and they've been extremely supportive in working with us and putting on this event.
And we're going to give away a ton of hunt stock tickets there too, or they'll be in the raffle prizes
Yeah.
and in the buckets. A bunch of 3-day passes, a bunch of single-day tickets. We'll probably also just offer discounted tickets there if you want to show up and get your hunt stock tickets at a better price. I'll be there. I haven't talked to Pat if he's open that weekend. Pat Burns will probably be there too.
Like I said, Pat's on our board, right? And he's been
Yep.
great. I think the other thing I want to say is we're appreciative of the generosity of Hunt Stock from last year, where you guys made a significant contribution to Mass Bowhunters to support our
Absolutely.
efforts. So
Yeah.
it's a great partnership, and like a huge part of what we're trying to do now is not just raise money to keep doing the same things. I think bringing yourself and Pat onto our board. I think bringing Chris on. We've got this great new next generation of creative thinkers in this space. We're doing a podcast. I don't think I've done a podcast yet. So it's great use of new medium and appeal to the great base of young hunters that are coming on. And who want to participate and want to have a role, but maybe in a different way than my
Yeah.
generation has done it up to that point.
Yeah, times change, and I mean that's the whole thing around hunt stock is just getting with the times, doing something different, offering something for the next generation that still appeals to the older generation too. And I think we're throwing around a bunch of great possible new ideas for Mass Bow Hunters and maybe different levels of memberships and things like that. But you just if you do the same thing, as you were doing 30 or 40 years ago, eventually it's all going to age out and it's not going to resonate with younger people. So that's what I'm excited about. And
me too, by the way. I mean, it's if it's not working, and it's not, the old stuff's not working, and that's not to diminish the contributions that have been made by people who are still involved. There's really some phenomenal people who are still very much involved in advocating for bow hunting and for hunting in general. We're members of the Mass Conservation Alliance, great group of clubs, organizations statewide who are trying to advocate at the highest levels for the most specific, and they've been great advocates for. In fact, their top priorities were the three things I just discussed. They were the crossbow bill, the setback efforts, and also Sunday hunting. So great organization to align with. We've been longtime members of the Mass Sportsmen's Council, and the utmost respect for John Kellestrand and that organization. They've done an awful lot over the years and continue to do an awful lot to advocate for all of us. So all these bills, we partner with them and we advocate with them. I mean, we've done things like trying to hire a lobbyist. We actually drained our treasury a couple of years ago and put it all towards hiring lobbyists to help us to pass some of these bills because what we were doing wasn't working. So it's just when it's not working, we have to try something different.
Yeah, and when I'm talking about evolving as the organization or making change, a lot. I'm not really talking about the roots of the the mission of the organization because that shouldn't really change, and the whole legislative process doesn't change. I mean, it's been since 1776. It's pretty much the same.
Yeah.
So you've got to have that same goal, the same keep attacking it the way that we have. Maybe find a few new ways, like you said, lobbyists, or figure out new ways to get the word out and express what our missions and goals are to the right people. That can change a little bit, but just in the fundraising aspect and how you're touching the hunters in Massachusetts that want an organization to be lobbying on their behalf and looking out for their best interests. And I think that's getting more on social media, maybe updating the website a little bit, and offering
and partnering with you guys. I mean, if you look at where outside of the hunting experience, where is there value to a hunter, right? And to me, it's in events like Hunt Stock, right? Because you can go to an event that's a one-stop, shop for seeing the best speakers, the best content, the best products, and so to me that's why this alignment is important to us. And I think you're right. For those of you who don't know, I mean, there's really two basic ways we're going to change hunting regulations, right? One is if we have laws that preclude it. So crossbows are illegal unless you have a special permit. So we're trying to eliminate that illegality. Things like the 500-foot restriction, things like Sunday hunting goes way back, and they're laws. So we have to change laws through the legislature. So that's the House and the Senate, and then it has to be signed off by the governor. The regulations are done and managed by the 7-person Fisheries and Wildlife Board. We have very, very strong relationships there. We're very closely tied with Mark Tisa.
What's an example of a regulation?
So a regulation would be how many permits you get for bear hunting. Bear hunting is legal. So how many permits, the length of the seasons, those are all controlled by the 7-person Fisheries and Wildlife Board. But they will usually solicit feedback from the biologists at Mass Wildlife.
Yeah.
So what we'll do is we'll work closely with Mass Wildlife and with the 7-person board and help with the justification of, biological justification of what we're asking for, as well as the recreational justification of what we're asking for. And those two things are what the Fish and Wildlife Board will take into account. And I think we have a very friendly Fish and Wildlife Board. And like I said, close relationships with Mass Wildlife. So, we're constantly soliciting feedback on what do you want to see changed. Like I said, at Springfield, we had, petitions and different information on initiatives. And the best thing for us is the opportunity to talk to people. So, as much as the pig roast is an opportunity to raise some funds, I mean, to me, the best part about that is just bringing together a bunch of people who love bow hunting, having the chance to talk to them, great opportunity for feedback for us, great opportunity for people to meet us and hopefully understand that, we're passionate about this and we're strong advocates for what they love.
And one thing I want to say too is that if you're watching this or listening to this and a very controversial subject is the crossbow subject.
Yes.
And if you're listening to this and you're against that one idea, that shouldn't, please don't, because I'm against that idea. I don't really like the idea of everybody being able to have a crossbow. That doesn't mean that I don't want to be a part of the organization or don't believe in the other things or want to support. And I think just anybody listening and watching, don't let that stop you from becoming a member of Mass Bowhunters. Because
yeah, absolutely.
We're advocating for all kinds of different rule changes. We have to paint a broad brush, and as you were saying before we started recording, the major driver behind that is just hunter numbers, and we want to have more hunters enter the fold, and if that's through a crossbow for whatever reason, then that's the reason behind the crossbow legislation, right?
Yeah, we also have an aging hunting population, and when we were at Springfield, I would tell you that probably 50% of the hunters that we talked to, who were of a, let's say 50 and older age range,
yep,
were using a special permit to hunt with a crossbow. So it's ludicrous to me that, and you were talking about a friend of yours who uses a crossbow now because they had an injury. They can shoot a bow now, but because they went and got a crossbow and the way that that's structured,
they
stuck with can't go back.
Yeah.
They have to keep using. It's ludicrous. Let's just
So
allow
is that a
it.
regulation, that part?
Yes.
Maybe, I think that would be it's not going to be, I don't know, the percentage of crossbow users right now who have to be medically approved for it.
Yeah.
That then had an injury heal. That's probably a very low percentage, but that
Right.
might be something.
That might be something we can address
fairly
I agree.
easily
Yeah.
to address.
But the other side of it is, even our board was split on the issue of crossbow.
Yeah.
And we decided to advocate for it because, again, we felt, we were protecting our older hunters and allowing them to continue to get out and do what they love. And also the opportunity to bring in, newer hunters. And, I think, the thought that we're going to be suddenly have the woods flooded with gun hunters carrying crossbows, it's not that easy. And I think if anybody's hunted with a crossbow, you realize pretty quickly It's closer to bow hunting than it is to gun hunting. In fact, in some ways, you get one shot, right, and then getting another one loaded is pretty tough. So the other side of it, I mean, we sell about 30,000 licenses in Massachusetts now. You know, I think all of us probably know some hunters who hunt in other states and don't even bother in Massachusetts because they can't hunt on Sunday or they can't hunt with a crossbow, right? So, I think, we'll get those licenses, we'll get those hunters. The goal here isn't to flood your woods with more hunters. The goal is to, get more hunters involved and continue to preserve our passion for hunting.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's important that, and I think it's telling of the organization that the board was split on whether that should be pursued or not, because you want diverse viewpoints and opinions, and that's the point of having a diverse board, is that
that's right.
Not everybody's going to be aligned on the same thing. You don't want that.
Yep. And if you, what I would also say is, if you're against it, let us know. Let us know, and what your perspective is. I think if you read our newsletter, so we have a quarterly newsletter that Mike Belial publishes. He does a phenomenal job with it. And one of the things Mike will do is he will publish, pieces opposing the crossbow or with information about the crossbow. So, as much as we may be advocating for a license change there, we also care about the issues.
Yeah. But again, if you're listening to this and that's an issue that you're opposed to, don't let that stop you from becoming a member, because of all the other great things, like most recently, that Mass Bowhunters has played a huge part in getting all the western zones now to have that early season start time, the same as the eastern zones now. That benefits, I guarantee, a lot of the people who are against a crossbow, legislation or regulation change. They're happy about that opening, and they would be happy if Sunday hunting
or the setbacks are changed, right? So absolutely, and hopefully, happy about all the things that we've been able to advance.
Yep. Let's go back to the pig roast real quick. There's some really good hunts and fishing charters and stuff that'll be auctioned off there. One of my favorite things about the Northeast Big Buck Club banquet is getting to that time, because there's some really great, you can get some great value out of hunts while supporting an organization. So that's just, you can't get any better than that. And there's an African safari hunt worth $27,000 being auctioned off. There's one that I'm really excited about bidding on, is the Missouri whitetail bow hunt. I think it's Knox County Whitetails, and those guys do a great job. I've met them at a few events. I've seen, the deer they have there. They've got, I think, 20,000, 35,000 something acres of land leased there with just bow hunting only. Awesome place. I've been thinking about doing it anyway, so I'm going to be bidding on that one. And then there's a whole bunch of fishing charters, some hog hunts. There's going to be really a great opportunity to get some hunts at a good price.
Yeah, and also some artwork and some great, everything from Tacticam cameras to knives to, so we'll have auction items like that, but we'll also have raffle items like that. And, we'll continue to try and build that between now and when that happens. But already we have a great portfolio set up for you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And just to remind people again, just go to massbowhunters.com, hit the shop tab. You can buy your tickets there, or you can call Lisa at 413-315-0248. And I imagine, too, if they don't have tickets by the time it rolls around, they can show up and pay for it there.
Yep. Absolutely.
And it's $40 a ticket, right?
Right. $40 a ticket.
And then that gets you the pig roast, the great food, and entry into all of the other, the opportunity to bid on hunts and to enter the raffles.
Correct.
Cool. So I hope to see as many of you guys there, and Ken does, the rest of the board, and cool. So is there anything else on Mass Bowhunters that you want to touch on or talk about, or do you want to talk about hunting at this point?
Well, the only other thing I'll do is I'll say if you want to talk, my number's 978-204-6329, and literally we can't get enough of us involved in this. So I want to hear your perspectives, and if you want to get involved, we'll welcome it. There's plenty of opportunities to get involved, and many hands make work lighter. So right now it's a pretty impassioned group a relatively small group of people that are doing a lot of the work, but we're not afraid to share.
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Again, 978-204-6329.
Great. Cool. Well, let's talk a little bit about hunting, Ken, and like how did you get into hunting yourself?
Well, so I was raised the oldest of 6 kids. I grew up in a little town, a very small town in Connecticut. You might have heard of it. It's called Lyme, and we have a great tick disease named after us.
Yep.
But with all those ticks, they had to live somehow, and they were living on all the deer. And so my dad and my brothers and I all hunted together, and I developed a passion for it there. I've always my dad tells me the story that when I was 4 years old, we stopped at a field to look at some deer, and my parents went to get back in the car, and they couldn't find me, and I was running across the field chasing the deer. So I've always had an affinity for deer, and even growing up, I had my dad was a big upland bird hunter, and my brothers were big duck hunters because we grew up right on the Connecticut River where there was outstanding duck hunting. Not me. I would much rather have been sitting in a tree and chasing a big buck than anything else. So, grew up doing that. Moved to Massachusetts. When I first got out of college and got married, and actually went to a sporting goods shop in Milford, Mass, called Jerry's Bait and Tackle.
Oh yeah.
And Jerry at the time was the vice president of the Mass Bowhunters Association. And we would talk, and he said, we need guys like you to help us. Are you interested? And that's how I wound up joining and getting involved from an advocacy perspective. And I think I have my own children. They're grown now, and they hunt. I still hunt with my brothers and my dad, and I do this for really the reason of wanting to be able to pass it on. Somebody taught it to me. One of the things I'm very involved with some of the state's programs around teaching youth and teaching women, the Becoming an Outdoors Woman program, the youth turkey hunt, the youth deer hunt. And one of the things that's very clear to me is that a lot of us do this because we were raised with it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who have an interest, and with all the great content now in being able to watch hunting, there's a tremendous interest in hunting, but people don't have mentors or anybody to teach them. And so anything we can do to do that is going to help to preserve what we know is a great passion and to me a core component of who we are.
Yeah. And again, that's one of the core missions at Huntstock is to provide a place where new hunters can come and get up to speed real fast and shorten their learning curve. And I get people reaching out to me all the time that listen to this podcast for that reason, because they weren't raised hunting and they're adult onset hunters. They found a curiosity for it now, and they get into it, and they learn a lot from podcasts and from events and from mentors.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you story after story of 35-year-old men, 50-year-old men that we've introduced to hunting and who have come to me and said, I had no idea this was in me, or what a gift this has been, and this has been something I wish I was doing much earlier in my life.
Yep. Yeah. I think pretty much anybody that gets into it wishes they were doing
not
it
just
their
men,
whole
by
life.
the way. I mean, one of the fastest growing segments of our population is women hunters.
Yeah.
And it's cool because in teaching the Becoming an Outdoors Woman program, one of the things I learned is women bring a unique perspective to the woods as well, and a lot of them are better at us sometimes at certain aspects of hunting, like being stealthy, than we are. We think we're better at that, but maybe not always, right?
I mean, I just had Cheryl Magdiz on, and she's part of that Becoming an Outdoors Woman program and this program, American Daughters of Conservation. I don't know if you've heard of them, but I met her at the Mass Bowhunters booth in Springfield, actually. She came up to the booth. She became a member right there. I think she bought a 3-year membership, and she's now Huntstock's volunteer coordinator. She's handling all the volunteers for Huntstock. for both events. American Daughters of Conservation will be at Huntstock, and she's working on growing that organization. So hopefully we've got some synergies there with Mass Bowhunter,
Yeah.
and her organization too.
And I think that's the other thing that's really encouraging is, we've got collaboration with Huntstock, we've got collaboration with backwoods hunters, backcountry hunters. I think we've got we're talking now about collaboration with Safari Club. So there's a lot, we have a lot of commonality, and we may have differences, but really, if we focus on the commonality, I think we're going to be able to accomplish a lot more, and we're going to be a lot stronger as advocates.
Oh yeah.
And we need that, because if you look at where we're at right now and some of the legislative initiatives just around things like guns, it's crazy, right? And if we don't make our passion known and our voice heard, we're going to get railroaded. And nothing irks me more than to go to public hearings on Sunday hunting and listen to some of these hikers who will stand up and talk about wanting the woods to be safe on Sunday. And I think we all need to be more comfortable and more indignant with the concept that is just discrimination against us. And we are essentially a minority group, right, in this state. I mean, less than 3% of the population hunts.
Yep.
So for people to stand up and say, if we stood up in a public setting and said any other demographic is dangerous, and we should be afraid of them, and therefore restrict their access to anything on a Sunday, how would that be characterized? That'd be characterized as prejudice, right? Well, it's okay to say that about hunters. How is that okay? And how are we letting that happen? How are we accepting that? Especially when, if you look at statistically, there is absolutely no data to support any kind of contention that we're dangerous.
Yeah, I don't think there's been one instance where, I think it's with gun hunters too, but I was going to say bow hunters, have shot a dog or a person mistakenly or anything like that. I think I've looked it up before. It goes across the board. There's not even a gun accident.
I think there's one. I think there's one that happened a few years back. And even,
most of them that happen are between hunters. It's shooting another hunter.
Yeah, I think there were one or two, but I mean 1 or 2 in 100 years.
Yeah.
And those 1 or 2 are even debatable because, by the way, one of them was a retired state police trooper, and he shot a woman who was during the muzzleloader season. So again, nothing with the bow, not a single event with the bow. But on top of that, there was another one where the guy didn't even have a license. So how do you call that a hunter? That's a criminal.
That's a poacher.
That's a criminal.
Yeah.
So you're right. There's no data, and it's unconscionable to me that that people can use that claim, but they're doing it, and they're doing it effectively, and somehow our legislature feels like well, we want to preserve that one day a week that people get to hike,
which is. I mean, I see hikers all the time. I'm a suburban hunter. I see hikers, dog walkers, bicyclists.
If we're dangerous on Sunday, how are we not dangerous on the other 5 or 6 days of the week when we're hunting, right? We're not.
I think a lot of it is just people are misinformed or uninformed entirely that hunters are dangerous.
Yeah.
And, you see that more so in zones 10 and 11, and when you're closer to Boston and in these towns, like we're in Framingham right now, you see that kind of a reaction in the suburban areas and the urban areas, but I think we just need to don't know. We need to educate, and I don't know the best way. Part of that is just if you run into while you're hunting during the week, if you run into people, and just like us as hunters have a responsibility to represent ourselves well during those times when you run into them or somebody sees you, even if they're not being cordial with you. How we react to that is, I think, paramount to the whole thing. So if there's better interactions with non-hunters and hunters during the hunting season, and it's not confrontational all the time, I think we can be stewards for that and open up a lot of eyes that way.
Get involved in your local conservation organization. If your town has a conservation organization like a land trust. I was on the board of my local land trust. I lived up in Ashby for a bunch of years, and I was the only hunter on the board. But it was a phenomenal opportunity for me to share the hunter's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, what we would do is we would acquire land. We would ensure, because of the voice that I, had in that body, that the land was open to hunting. Sometimes there were stipulations that portions of the land be closed because the landowner, it was within range of the previous owner's house or something like that. We would actually work with the local sportsman's club. So that's the Fitchburg Run Gun Club or the Fitchburg Sportsman's Club up there. We engaged them, and they helped us to post the property. So all of a sudden, we're helping the land trust to post property to not hunt, and that's got to change people's thinking, right? And I think we are the original conservationists anyway as hunters, because much of your budget for fish and wildlife and wildlife management is paid out of our license funds.
Yep.
So huge portion of it. So
Yeah, and another common misconception from the dog walkers, the people that want to enjoy the woods on Sunday without any danger, is that they love the animals, they love the wildlife, but so nobody loves it more than we do.
No.
And they don't realize that we're playing our part in it by making sure that those species are cared for and they're
Right.
regulated the right ways, and they're going to be there for a long time. They don't really have a concept where they don't know that 50 deer per square mile isn't good for the
Right.
overall ecology and the environment of every species that they love to see. If you have 50 deer per square mile and it's destroying the undergrowth and the vegetation, because the carrying capacity, 50 deer per square mile is the land can't support that type of carrying capacity, so it destroys the undergrowth, and they don't realize that. When that happens, well, now your ground nesting birds population is going to go down, or the rabbits
That's
that you
right.
love to see, and even the coyotes and the bobcats, which I just saw a post in my local town, today of a big bobcat, and people in the comments under there.
Everybody's
like,
afraid of 'em, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
hopefully it goes
Yeah.
back into the woods, but they were like, that's so awesome to see that, and well, they're not going to be around if the rabbits and
Right.
the mice and the things that rely on the understory, the undergrowth, if that population declines, well, they decline with it, and it's just a big balanced system, and hunters are funding and supporting to have a balanced ecosystem.
Yeah, not to mention our role in controlling those populations, right? And then we're not even talking about car accidents and tick disease and all those
Yep.
things that have a profound impact on populations. So I think the key is that if you're sitting here saying, well, that's all great, but how do I only have so much time, I just want to hunt. That's fine. Just make sure your neighbors and your friends have a face to hunting, and you are that face.
Yeah.
And I know that almost everybody that I know is a hunter, is an ethical person, and is a good person who conveys that when you have a conversation with them. So that's an easy enough thing for all of us to do. I've gone off the deep end being the president of the Bowhunters Association, and my wife will give you great evidence of that. But we're not asking you to do that, right? But if you can join our organization and support us, that's fantastic. And if you're trying to figure out how you can get involved, let's talk.
Yep. And I mean, I've never had a negative interaction with a non-hunter.
Nope.
So far.
No,
Right?
me neither.
I think a lot of that is how I react to them.
Yeah.
Even the other day I was shed hunting, or a couple weeks ago I found a couple of sheds in this little shoehorn of town land in between some houses, and I just walked down that little finger. By the way, that's a great place to pick up some sheds if if it's land that you can be on, get into those little
Yeah.
shoehorn fingers, especially in years like now where we didn't have a great acorn crop. There's not a lot of food in the woods left over, so they're getting up close to houses and feeding on shrubs and bushes and stuff. But I was in that little shoehorn on a rainy day because I like to go out in the rain. Nobody else is in the woods, and you can see sheds. And nice house, real nice house there, big windows looking right into that little horseshoe. And this woman sees me there, and she comes out, and she kind of approaches me aggressively, you know, hey, what are you doing? You know, and I'm like, oh, she's like, I'm just out looking for these. I held up an antler, and she's like, you're just wandering around the woods. I'm like, yeah, this is actually a hobby. You know, deer drop their antlers every single year, and it's fun, good exercise. Go out and look for them on the ground, and you pick them up. It's like a scavenger hunt. And she, you know, she was kind of standoffish to the whole thing, and I'm like, yeah, you know, this is town land. You know, I can be right in this spot. She's like, yeah, I know it is. She was a little standoffish, but it ended up being a good interaction with her because I wasn't rude to her.
She probably didn't even know deer drop their antlers, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most don't.
Yeah.
Most people who aren't hunters they don't know that.
Yeah. No, I think that's the great opportunity, right? But you know, you asked me about hunting, so that's how I started hunting, and actually Jerry Guerreri convinced me. I was a gun hunter at the time. He convinced me to be a bow hunter.
Okay. Jerry started all that.
Jerry was he's another one of those guys who's been a great mentor for a lot of people in hunting in the central part of the state.
Yeah, I met him a few times. That's where I took my bow for the first few years.
Yeah.
And then I went to Reedy's for a couple of years, and
Yeah.
Chris is just an awesome guy. Again, he's on the board of directors.
You can't do bow hunting I think without having an archery shop that's a resource for you, right?
Yeah.
And they can be a resource in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah.
So there's fewer and fewer of them, but the ones that are still there in this state are fantastic.
Yeah.
So started to do a lot more bow hunting, and then got into traveling a little bit more. So I've had the opportunity to hunt in some of the great places like Kansas and Saskatchewan and Missouri and love doing that and really just that's where I want to go now. I don't belong to a country club. So I put all my money into hunting and doing those kinds of things.
But you still hunt the Northeast. You go to Maine every year, right?
Maine every year.
Do you hunt with Mike Stevens from Big
I do.
Woods
I hunt
Bucks
with Mike Stevens, who is part of Big Woods Bucks and pretty tight affiliation with Hal Blood. And his son Cam, who's awesome. I mean, they're both great guides, and they become very good friends. I hunt turkeys with them as well, and I've kind of become a maniac about turkeys too. I love chasing them with bow and or gun. Again more gun. It's very hard with the bow, and I love the idea of not necessarily setting up on a blind, but just up close and personal, sitting against a tree.
Yep.
Tough to do that with a bow.
Yep.
But hunt Maine, hunt New Hampshire, hunt Vermont a little bit, not as much, just because I don't have the places, and I live close to the New Hampshire border. Still hunt Connecticut on the property I grew up hunting, which is a gift. A lot of that's part of been preserved by the Nature Conservancy, but they actually allow hunting. So I go down and do some of that with my brother. Still do it with my brothers and my dad, which is awesome. But now my son comes with us. My daughter comes with me. One of my daughters, I have grandchildren now, so looking forward to getting them out there. They already have camo and all that stuff, and so it's a passion.
Well, you're welcome to come to my deer camp sometime in Vermont. Since you don't have
love to.
a place that's got a lot of awesome tradition, and it's in a great spot. You
Fantastic.
Can, come up for a weekend during rifle season sometime. I don't get up there as much anymore because I'm hunting around here a lot, with the young family and everything.
I think that's one of the things growing up where I grew up, we could walk out the door and hunt.
Yep.
And I live up in Ashburnham now, and I live in a pretty rural area. You've seen my house, and I love that I can walk out the door and hunt, and I don't feel like I have to travel, as much anymore. And I got to tell you, I mean, this state, I'm looking at some of the bucks. You were pointing out a couple of these bucks in this room here to me, and they're all Massachusetts bucks, and we have some fantastic hunting in this state and some really high quality bucks, and sometimes staying home is better than going somewhere else.
Yeah, and it's very rewarding.
Yeah,
because
it really is.
There aren't as many of them as there are in Missouri or Kansas. They're just not as many big mature bucks, so you have to work a little bit harder for them, and And I love it. That challenge is the best part of it for me. Is you work hard, because any of these deer from my deer camp would be one of the top 10 deer
It's all relative,
ever
right?
shot there.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's all relative, and to me, if you shoot a 140 or a 150 class buck in Massachusetts,
yeah.
is that comparable
That's like
to
a
what?
booner in
Yeah, it's like
Kansas,
shooting
yeah.
a 170 class in Kansas, right, or Iowa. So, I love that. But I mean, I have friends I have one very good friend who shot two, 150 class bucks in the Northeast last year. I mean,
Yeah.
he had an amazing year,
Oh
and
yeah, it happens,
yeah, it does happen.
and it can happen if you just put in some work.
Yeah,
Yeah, but there's something about being able to walk out your back door and
Yeah.
hunt, and there's something romantic about it, and you get that in a deer camp scenario, like the post I just made 10 weeks ago. By the way, we're doing a deer camp contest because I made a post of my deer camp, picture of it. Take a picture of any deer camp you belong to. Send it to me, huntsuburbia@gmail.com, or DM it on Instagram, either Huntstock or Huntsuburbia, and just tell me a little bit about the traditions of it. We're going to print all those out and display them at Huntstock.
Cool.
To show everybody's traditions and just what deer camps and that whole culture means. So yeah, send those in to me. But I made the post, and I've walked out of that camp door, walked right out the back into the woods. We're nestled in the woods there, up and over a hill, shot deer and dragged it back down, and that's the dream. So even when I was buying a house in 2019, when I moved out here, I wanted to make sure that there were woods in the backyard. That the backyard doesn't butt up to another fence with a house behind it, and you're in I want to be on the edge where I can walk into some woods.
Right.
And I acquired an acre and a half of land behind my house, which is just enough for me to be able to hunt with permission from my neighbors, because it was still within the 500-foot setback, so I need written permission from my neighbors, which was no problem. They didn't know much about hunting before, but once everybody learns about it,
And if somebody's out there, why not somebody we know? And
they both eat venison,
respect,
and I
yeah.
give them venison every year, whether I get one back
go,
there or
yeah.
not. I get one or two, somewhere else,
Yeah.
and I always give them venison, and they enjoy it.
Well, that's again that concept of the face of hunting, right? You're the face of hunting to them, and that's a positive experience. So when somebody's standing up there saying hunters are dangerous, they're going, nah, Pat's not that way.
Yeah.
What do you mean hunters are dangerous?
Yep.
But I think the thing I love too is that it's if you count how many deer I've shot, how long does it take to shoot a deer? A minute?
Yeah.
That's being generous sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And maybe with a bow, if there's a recovery process, it's a little longer, but the shooting part is pretty minimal.
It's over quick.
And and some of us spend hundreds of hours a year. So what are we doing the rest of the time? If there's minutes spent shooting the deer, what's the rest of it about? It's about the experience, right? And what you're describing is one form of experience that's rewarding, right? It's being able to do it around your house. The deer camp experience is something totally different.
Yep.
Traveling to a unique place and hunting for the first time in a Kansas or a Nebraska or a Missouri or an Iowa, fantastic, right? And some of my greatest memories. I went to Saskatchewan. Everybody on the trip shot a buck. I didn't, but I hunted every day and I saw dozens of deer and I saw some corkers that I just couldn't get a shot at.
Yep.
And I held out. That's as valuable a memory to me as when I went to Kansas and shot the biggest buck I've ever shot.
Oh yeah.
So there's so much more to hunting than just what you shoot and what you bring home, and I think that's the other part of it is just enjoying those experiences and sharing those experiences.
Yeah, I went to North Dakota for the first time a couple of years ago with two good friends. Nobody shot a deer. It was the most memorable trip I've ever taken.
There you go.
And the most memorable hunting. It was just the experience there was unlike anything else.
Yeah.
And see that 6-pointer on the left up there?
Yeah.
That's the one deer that I've shot on my own property and dragged into my backyard, which it was just amazing.
That's a trophy.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And at the time that was I shot him the same year as the one to the right of him. He was second, but he was he's arguably bigger. He doesn't score as much, but he was a bigger buck than that one too. So it was like my biggest buck dragging up through my backyard.
Yeah.
My dream of when I was buying the house was, and being able to hunt back there, I did it. I don't even hunt behind my house very often at all, just because I'm always out scouting and doing shed hunting, and I'm, finding all these great places to hunt, and that I never go. I didn't even hunt back there once last year. But there are great deer that just go back there. One time I was going back behind my house just to check a camera. I walked down and there was a 145-inch 8-pointer that I was after the whole year.
Wow.
But it was after I tagged out on those two. And so I was just going to check a camera. And that giant 8 got to within 20 yards of me, just started making scrapes, rubs. I just knelt down next to a big tree and just watched him for 20 minutes. So there are big deer that travel back there.
You're in the presence of royalty, right?
That's exciting.
Yeah. I mean, it's exciting. But and I think the other thing, like if you said to me, tell me about some of your most memorable experiences. When my son was 12, we went down to Connecticut and he shot a doe and a buck because in Connecticut they get their own tags when they're youth hunters.
Yep.
And he shot an 8-point buck, and it was his first time hunting. And with the Model 94 Winchester Model 94 30-30 that was my grandfather's, that my father shot his first deer with, that I shot my first deer with, and I mean that probably was better than any any deer I've ever shot.
Is that a Marlin?
No, Winchester.
No,
Winchester Model 94. Yeah. But the classic lever action.
I hunted my first gun, and I hunted with it for the first probably 15 years of my life, was a 32 Special lever action.
Yep.
Again, that my grandfather hunted with and my dad did, and then I hunted.
That a Marlin?
And no, that wasn't a Marlin. I just know a lot of kids grew up, shooting a Marlin.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, no, that there's something again that's part of that tradition, the deer camp
Yeah.
tradition kind of. If you grow up in that type of thing, chances are you shot a gun that your grandfather did.
Yeah, well, so my son's 30 years old now, and he has his own home in Vermont, and I just gave him the 30-30, and said, okay, this is your gun now. And it's a pretty cool thing.
Yeah,
right?
passing it down.
Yeah. So that's part of, that's a literal version of passing on the tradition, right?
Yep.
But that to me is one of the best parts of it.
Yeah.
We go to deer camp. It's funny because you talked about Mike Stevens, and I think Mike. We call ourselves Team Brown, and we have hats and and jackets and stuff. And Mike always talks about Team Brown coming up to hunt with him. I think he loves it. I don't think Mike loves it because we're good hunters. Some of us are, some of us aren't, to be honest. I think he loves it because it's 4 generations. You know? And just to see that. And have 4 generations of hunter coming up there, and seeing my dad, who's the patriarch, and then down through the ages is an awesome experience for me.
Yeah, and I think that's what's great about getting new hunters into it and being a mentor for somebody who didn't grow up in that generational tradition. Is that they get to now start. They get to be the patriarch
That's
or
right.
the matriarch of their generational. And it's, you introduce one person to hunting, or you mentor one person, and it's crazy to think how that can spread.
Trickle down.
It just trickles down, I don't think my grandfather ever would have given it a second, even one thought, or my dad, that my grandfather introducing my dad getting me into it, and then
that was just what you did, right?
Randomly starting a podcast, and now thousands of people that are listening to it, and getting new hunters into it because of that.
Yeah.
Like the coaching tree there starts with my grandfather, and it goes down, and just think about how it trickles out. It's
I have lifetime friends now that I had the opportunity to introduce to hunting, or who were part of my introduction to hunting through my dad.
Yep.
My dad's friends who hunted with us, and they come to me with us still in their 80s.
Yep.
And they wouldn't miss it. And that's our common bond is just hunting. Nobody cares. The thing that's so cool about hunting is nobody cares about what you do for a living. Nobody cares how much money you make. Nobody cares about anything, and it's just about being in the woods and sharing those experiences, right?
Yeah.
And that's what's so awesome about it. I think the other part of it is, seeing as you just described, people that you introduced to it now introducing others. And that's amazing.
Yep. Yeah. Well, it's all good. Did you have do you have any stories from this past hunting season? Of I forget if you got a deer this year or multiple.
Yeah, so this year I did not. I hunted I hunted Maine. I hunted New Hampshire, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and I actually hunted Alabama. And one of my very good friends owns a farm down in Alabama, and we worked together. And I was down there and got to hunt with him. And he does a tremendous job of taking care of and creating land to hunt, and areas to hunt.
Yep.
And so saw a bunch of deer with him, but didn't see anything, worth pulling the trigger or the string on in all those seasons. I think my most memorable recent hunt was the year before last. I went down to Connecticut and hunted the property I told you I still am able to hunt on. It's conservation land, and I shot a really nice 8-pointer, and I shot him sitting against a tree on a rock that I have sat on most of my life, at some point in the fall for most of my life. So, to be able to go someplace and sit on the same rock against the same tree, it's a little bigger, but the same tree, and have deer come up the same trail, really, really a neat experience for me. Kind of grounding, right?
Yeah.
And a really nice buck. So
was it with a gun or a bow? Or?
It was with a gun. It was with a gun, and an area where I did a lot of scouting and had a pretty good idea he was in there. But still, very rewarding to be able to. One of the things that happens to me sometimes is I'm still working. I have a pretty hectic job, so I might not get as much time as I joke and say sometimes. Part of the reason I'm the president of the Mass Bowhunters Association is because I'm better in a boardroom than I am in the woods. I'm not the president because I'm a great hunter. I'm the president because I'm good with the organizational stuff, and so I do. I probably don't get to hunt as much as I would like to. And at some levels, I sacrifice some of my hunting time because you only get so much time away from your family. You probably understand that.
Yep.
And over the years, I've probably sacrificed a decent amount of hunting time for the advocacy stuff, right?
Yeah, and that's very admirable.
Yeah, but when I do get to hunt, I love it, and so for me, just being able to get that time out and be able to hunt in the place that I grew up in was really special.
And it really isn't about stacking a room with as many trophies or big bucks as you can. Even though, I haven't killed giant bucks, my biggest is 127 inches. They're nice deer. And everything is relative, right? Sometimes I look and I think, like, why am I just collecting these heads? I'm not trying to just shoot big bucks for a reason,
They're not trophies,
I like the challenge.
They are trophies, but they're not. The thing that people don't realize is, I don't put a deer on the wall. I only have one.
I noticed you had one in your living room there,
and that's it. And then the rest I keep the antlers. But to me, it's when I look at the one that I have one right over my fireplace in my living room, and he's a majestic deer, and it was an awesome hunt. And I look at it, and I look at it from the perspective of, wow, that brings me back to that moment, right? And to seeing him in his natural environment, and that's the closest I can get to that, right? Because that's all I'm going to be able to do. So, to me, that's the awesome aspect of it. I have some friends, and I know, like Pat Burns. I mean, he's got some tremendous trophies.
Yep.
But even the guys that we know, and probably some of the guys, watching this or listening to this, they work really hard. I mean, hours and hours and hours in the woods. And I've got one friend in particular I'm thinking of who's shot some really fantastic bucks. But even with all that work, he shoots maybe a really nice one once every 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not easy. We one of the challenges we all run into is you watch it on TV and it looks so easy because these guys are professionals, and you don't know half of what's going on behind the scenes, right? In order for them to have the kind of consistent success that they seem to have. But to me, anything that's worthwhile in life is something that you had to work for and you had to suffer for, and it took time to acquire. And so that buck I shot last year, as an example, that was the fruit of a lot of hours sitting in the woods and a lot of reading articles and a lot of thinking about shooting a nice buck. So
you're right. And to me, it's not easy. It's easy now for me to shoot a deer with a bow,
right,
or to shoot any buck with a bow. I could tag out pretty quickly because I have a lot of time. I've just structured my life so that I do have some time to hunt, which is outside of the family, my greatest joy is hunting. So I get a lot of time to hunt now, and it's easy to shoot a buck or any buck or 2 bucks, but it's not easy to shoot the mature ones, and that's why
And that's you.
I'm holding out.
And that's you, right? There might be another person who really hasn't gotten to that level yet where it's easy to shoot a buck or to shoot a deer.
Or they just don't have the time to, because it really is just how much time you put into it.
Or the place. I think an awful lot of what I've learned is, if you want to shoot big bucks, you have to hunt where there are big bucks.
Yep.
If you want to shoot deer consistently, you have to hunt in a place where there are deer consistently. So, some of the most generous gifts I've ever been given were permission to hunt on property, right? And we have to treat it that way and understand that acquiring a place to me, gold is having a 2 or 3 places that you can go sit and have a 50% or a 70% chance of seeing a deer, right? If you have that, that's gold, and protect that. Don't lose that. A lot of my landowners, I'll give them, gift certificates to restaurants, their favorite restaurants. You give venison.
Yeah.
I'll go do work for them. I have one of my neighbors, I buy him cigars every time I go by a certain cigar store because he loves cigars, right?
Yep.
So those kinds of things are really important, I think, to making sure that you have, because we have limited time, when we do have the time, number one, be ready to go, have your stuff ready in a way that you can go quickly, and number two, have places that you can go to that are going to be successful.
Yeah, and in Massachusetts in particular, there's I guess it's anywhere in the Northeast, but there's so much public land. We think that it's so little until you look at some states. I think like Missouri has hardly anything. Texas has none. There's places where it's like you need,
and they're all locked
releasing.
up, right? All even the private land's locked up. I mean, we're a presumption of openness state, so all land is presumed.
And there is a big buck in every public piece of property in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And you just have to put the work in to find it. Like everywhere that I hunt, I have one permission property in Sherborne, and it's like 15 acres, and it's a beautiful property. I've just never had any luck at that. It sets up like it'd be a great place to hunt. But I never have any luck there, or I find bigger deer on public pieces of land that I hunt. So for me, I have 4 or 5 of those places that you're talking about. They're all public. Yeah. They're all public, and I don't see hunters in there either, because you got to get a little crafty. And those places are out there. You just got to do your homework.
Yeah, I hunt in state forests up by where I live.
Yep.
And I used to have a newspaper column in my local paper. So it was funny because people liked how I wrote about hunting, and they said, I want you to hunt on my land. And they would call me up and say, come, I have so many places to hunt. I don't have the time to hunt them all, right?
Yeah.
But to me, doing the work to find some of the best places I hunt in places like Connecticut, nobody else is allowed to hunt there. And what's happened is I've done the extra work to convince that landowner that I'm a safe person, and they're recognizing that they're having problems with deer, and this is something I'll be comfortable with, right? So that I guarantee you there are guys watching this podcast that are going, "Shut up, Ken. That's my secret." Then they're hunting in the southeast portion of the state, or where there's higher populations, and they're hunting in somebody's backyard, and they have exclusive permission because they've got access, but they've done the work. Mm-hmm. That's the bottom line. They've done the work to find that place.
Yeah. And develop that relationship. Because that's important. Pat Burns is really good at that. He hunts mostly public land too, but he is a big metal detector, and he likes artifact hunting and things like that. So he'll go to real big properties, millions of dollars worth of land.
A lot of it's access too, right? Like,
how
many places do you have where if you came in the way everybody else came in, you're going to have to work so hard to get back where the deer are, but maybe you get through a private piece of property, right? And I have some of those places too.
Yeah, just last year, 2 years ago now, this big 6-pointer I shot with my muzzleloader, I walked in probably 1.25 miles to get to where I ended up shooting that buck.
Yeah.
And it's crafty entrance. It's not where everybody else enters. It was through a little, sometimes you look on Onyx, you can see a sliver of land that goes between 2 houses. that is like a public piece, or just like it comes down to the road, park on the road, sneak up that sliver. So I was still getting a different access going in that way than most other people, and I was able to get into the spot that I wanted to hunt that way. But it was a long walk, and I shot that deer, and I was like, oh geez, that's gonna be a heck of a hard drag to get him back there. But I was very close to a farm field edge. Talking, the deer died 30 yards from this farm field, right next to a shooting tower. You know, you can tell that there's a hunter there, and it died 30 yards from the shooting tower. In fact, it was bedded on the public land 30 yards into the woods from that shooting tower. He died there, and I just walked down the hill and knocked on the door, and the guy was like, absolutely, you can drag your deer out through there. I was like, all right. So I literally just had to walk down the road, get my truck, drive into that place, drove it all the way up to the back of his farm field edge. I had a 30-yard drag and got to put it in the truck. It was a lifesaver that day, and that guy's been amazing ever since. He's like, you can hunt my property anytime you want. Now his property is like 10 acres, and the piece I'm hunting is 1,000 acres of public, so I think I've hunted his land maybe once or twice along his field edge there, but mostly he allows me to access it through his field and get to where I ended up, where I like to hunt in there, which is probably a 500, 600 yard walk from there, but so much easier on the access. And it all started from, hey, just go knock on the door, go knock on the door and see if he'll let you drag the deer out.
Very cool. I think you bring up an interesting point. A lot of the places I hunt, that are public land, a lot of times what I'm looking at is, where is everyone else going in from?
Yeah.
And sometimes we talked about hikers and sharing the woods with hikers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the things I always testify to if I'm at these public hearings is, we don't want to be near you. We understand that you're there, so do the deer. So the deer, while they're comfortable with your presence,
they're not going to be around you.
They're going to avoid you. We're going as far back as we can find, and maybe trying to get away from, where there's a lot of people hiking or walking dogs or those kinds of things, or any other public activity. Same with other hunters, right? If I know a bunch of guys are coming in from one angle, I'll try to use that to my advantage and go in from a different angle and find a way in and set up, in a place that might be an escape route or something like that. So, I think those kinds of strategies are fun. I think the other thing I love about bow hunting is you're not necessarily dealing with other hunter contention, because it's so hard to walk and hunt. There are guys that are great at it, right, who are great still hunters, but or spot and stalk type, but not a lot of that here in the East, right? I love it because you're still hunting deer when they're in their natural travel patterns, their natural bedding, feeding, and maybe breeding, motivated patterns. So, to me, that's a big part of what I like about getting out in the woods early, right? And then my tactics are going to change when, you're joining a shotgun season, or you're joining a muzzleloader season, when there's a lot more hunters in the woods. The deer are used to, being chased, and maybe their primary motivation is no longer food, or mating, or probably much more around security and safety.
Yeah. And that might be a swamp. And you just made me think of...
I'm a big swamp guy.
Another strategy, like when you said, if you're trying to get permission on a property with walkers and trails and stuff, if you tell them you're not going to be hunting there, it reminded me there's just a gold mine piece of property not far from here that I've really wanted to get into, and I've written them letters. I've had conversations with them. There's somebody from Vermont, it's a business, and who's in that business, and it just would be perfect. It abuts a whole bunch of sanctuary that you can't hunt and things like that, and I thought I was on the right track to getting permission at that. This was a couple years ago, and they said no, there's just too many hikers. We use the trails all the time, and I'd use that strategy of, well, I'm not going to be anywhere near the trails, but I think a good angle to approach would be, if somebody says that, to say, well, do you guys walk your dogs through the swamp?
Right.
Or does anybody walk through that swamp? I'll just stay confined to the swamp. And maybe that, because nobody's going in there except for us.
That's another strategy in getting permission, is don't be afraid to be creative in terms of restrictions.
Mm-hmm.
I had a property, a 40-acre property down in Connecticut that I hunted, and it was just me and another friend of mine, and and he was the 35-year-old guy that I taught to hunt, and it was our place to go hunting, and we had a couple rules, and one of the rules was we we talked to the landowner about where do you not want us. Okay, so what's too close, right? Where do you want us to restrict our activities to? But even between us, we had rules of no drives, only sitting, right? And then other rules about self-imposed rules about what we would shoot, right? So we got to a point where we would only shoot mature bucks, and then at one point the landowner came to us and said, "Hey, we've got a problem, and the coyotes are getting too comfortable coming into the yard, and we have young children. So can you help us with the coyotes?" So we each shot a coyote one year, and I didn't really want to do it because I didn't want to mess up my deer hunt, but I shot a coyote, and the landowner was very appreciative of that, right?
Yeah.
So there's every situation, and I think that's part of it, is build that relationship with your landowners and understand what conditions are they comfortable with. The property I hunt, the conservation property I hunt in Connecticut, where I shot my nice buck the year before last, no hunting on Saturday or Sunday, only during the week.
Yep.
And maybe you have a landowner who's not home.
Yeah.
Or to your example, the business, we had a property in Connecticut where we hunted turkeys only, and we had to be out by 8 a.m.
Yeah.
So we only hunted certain hours.
Or only on the weekend if it's
or
a
only on the
business,
weekend. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I've heard recently of people who seen a big buck driving during the rut. Driving on the road, saw a really big buck in a suburban area, and saw where it literally went and bedded, and you can look and see, there's not much woods there. And then they went crazy knocking on every house on that street to get permission, and got a few of them. And the one piece that he really wanted, he got 48 hours permission. Got them to say, just let me in here for 48 hours, the next 2 days. That's it.
Wow.
And that could work. So
it's creative, right?
Yeah, being creative. It's that's Kyle.
Yeah.
Kyle from KBB Outdoors. So being creative can get you into a situation, even if you're in a scenario like that, or I don't know how you get into that scenario unless you're driving just driving around road hunting. But if you know that there's a deer in a certain patch of woods and he's not going to be there long, and you really want to get that deer. Yeah, try to get permission for a day.
I'll tell you, where I live, a lot of the really good hunters, they do drive the road. They're not. They may not be driving the roads to hunt, but on the way home from work or on the way to work, they're driving the roads and going out of their way and looking at known areas, and then they'll go after those deer.
Yep.
Maybe not that day, but maybe the next day.
I spent a lot of time in the summer, glassing, driving around and glassing. It's another tradition that I had that my dad. One of my best memories from being a kid is just driving around. We'd go on these hour and a half, 2-hour drives, and the same loop we did all the time. Just had a bunch of farm fields. We weren't never doing it to hunt it. We had our deer camp, but this was the best place just to go view deer and enjoy viewing wildlife. And I still love to do that. And now I do that in the summertime. That helps me locate bucks. It's actually how I found this buck. First was I saw him out in a field with a bunch of other bucks, and I was watching him, and that's how I honed in on where he's at.
Yeah.
And had a goal of finding both those sheds, and got super lucky in getting those this year.
Yeah.
And I'm working on now trying to get permissions.
Yeah.
In a place where he's huntable.
Yeah, what a rewarding deer that would be to shoot, right?
Yep.
That property I was telling you about in Connecticut.
Because this is from him too, from 2 years before that. Yeah. So a little bit of history with him.
The property I was telling you about in Connecticut, where I shot the coyote, I shot a really nice 9-pointer there, and I had his sheds from 2 previous years, and that's a lot of fun, right? Is hunting the same deer, and some guys are really good at that, right? Identifying a certain buck, and then chasing that buck, for 2, 3. In the case of, I think the one you showed me, Pat chased one for 6 years, right?
Yeah.
What a rewarding experience. So there's so much to it, right? And there's so much that people don't understand. But at the end of the day, I think we do, and most of the people probably taking the time to watch this do, and that's what we're trying to preserve, right? That's
Yep.
what we're trying to keep going.
Absolutely. Yeah. So once again, Mass Bowhunters Association, great organization. Join, please. Go to the pig roast May 5th,
Yep.
noon to 4, Oxford Rod and Gun Club.
Come and say hi. We'll be busy, but love to meet anybody who comes and talk hunting.
Absolutely. Yep. And then other than that, we'll see you at Huntstock, and you guys will be at Huntstock too.
Absolutely.
And
wouldn't miss it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we're looking forward to another awesome year.
Fantastic.
Thanks for having us on Mass Bowhunters. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Pat. Appreciate
Yep,
it.
absolutely.